Well, Alpesh is here. Alpesh Patel, of course, from Pryfinian Partners. Thank you for staying with us this morning and going through the papers with us. So, starting with the Daily Telegraph, and, well, it's a bit of an understatement, isn't it, really, David Cameron addressing... I think this is the address to the Canadian Parliament, isn't it, rather than his address to the UN yesterday, because he was making quite a few speeches yesterday.
Yes, flew up north to Canada. And, of course, this wasn't a realisation which has dawned on the British Prime Minister that there's an economic crisis. What worries me is that the more you keep highlighting it, the more you do make businesses think, well, you know, that IT investment we were going to make, we might just wait a bit until the politicians get their act in order and so on. It doesn't help in terms of certainty, constantly banging on about it. I'm not saying that there isn't a problem. What I'm saying is they should probably get on more with doing something about it than making speeches about it.
And earlier, yesterday, I believe it was, Cameron was one of those who signed a letter to the G20 leaders, addressed to President Sarkozy, calling for action, G20 action. Yes. Is he really saying, actually, European leaders get on and establish that stability fund?
What he is saying is that you need all to act together, just in case they hadn't come to that realisation themselves that they might need to do something. So I don't think that really helped much. I think what we do need to do within Europe, as I've mentioned many times before, is get over the fact of having this notion that no country must ever default in any way whatsoever. Even the rich city of Dubai had technically defaulted. It said, look, we can afford to pay, we're just going to take longer over it. Did people stop investing? No, they didn't. They've said, right, we know where the floor is, we know what the bottom line is, and we'll go back in and invest. And that'll be the same with Greece, it'll be the same with any of the major economies. Instead of saying we're going to make full payments, they just need to take a bit longer to make those payments.
Makes all the difference, doesn't it? Disorderly or orderly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a cash flow problem. That's what the problem is. And instead, they're being forced into having their backs against the wall and being told, right, you've got to make full payments no matter what. Well, that's just going to destroy their economies in the medium to long term, because the things they have to do to try and make those payments actually is causing destruction to their ability to generate the income to make those payments in the first place.
I think it's interesting what you said about the fact that if we all keep saying, well, we're standing in the brink, we're all looking at the abyss, somehow it makes it worse. And again, if we look at those markets, the falls that we saw in the stock markets around the world in the last couple of days, there is also a psychological thing about this time of year as well, isn't there?
Yes. The notion about September and October, and markets do tend to have pretty scary experiences with October, and that doesn't help, of course. And we haven't even yet started talking about those reasons for being worried. But, you know, we used to talk about talking your way into a recession, and it wasn't just that politicians were trying to fool us into thinking things were better than they were, but it actually does happen. You keep on seeing these headlines, and businesses and consumers think I'm going to put things off. Not because I should, but because all I'm reading, all I'm hearing, and it becomes self-fulfilling.
And that's one of the issues, isn't it, with unemployment in the United States, isn't it? Because you've got companies who are going, oh, actually, I'd quite like to expand. I've got some cash on my books. I could hire someone. Do you know what? I don't think I will. Don't grow the jobs market.
Well, let me give you the positive side of how this could have been spun. First of all, unemployment in the US is under 10%, and it's been under 10% for decades now, so it's not suddenly spiked. When you look at corporate earnings...
It has nearly doubled, though.
Under 10%, though. Under 10% makes it completely in line with all major economies. And, OK, it might have gone from 5 to 8%, and that's not fun for the people who are unemployed.
Absolutely.
We talk about 90% of people having jobs. 90%. Albeit, some of them are having to have 2 jobs and so on. We're not living in... I wish I could wave a magic wand and everybody could just work 9 till 5. Yes, we're all working harder, but we're all working harder across the board around the world.
But that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because it's really how those unemployment figures, as the example, feeds into the politics. And, of course, President Obama knows that he has a very, very slim chance of re-election with unemployment figures like that. And this crisis does come down, to a large extent, doesn't it, to a failure of the political leadership.
It does not help when politicians think they need to be obsessed about growth, given that 1% growth on a $14 trillion economy. Well, thank God you're actually got a $14 trillion economy, and I can live with that 1% for this year, because you've still got the $14 trillion behind you. That's the good thing. But no, they're obsessing about the 1%, and they're saying if we miss that, we're all going to hell in a handbasket. Well, no, we're not. $14 trillion in the US is the size of the economy there. $14 trillion in the EU, that's the size of the economy here, despite Greece, mighty Greece. And China is a $6 trillion economy, and Japan is a $5.5 trillion economy. With no growth at all, that's the size of goods and services being produced. So there's a lot of positive, let alone the fact that companies are producing bumper earnings. They still are. Yeah. It's the consumer and government which are stuffed, but nobody will talk about corporate earnings. They're producing bumper earnings, and yet we're focusing on the negative aspects. It's not cosmetic. When I say don't talk about this, it is substantial that if we do focus on investments and the fact why we should be making investments, then it'll be better for all of us. The Dow's at 2006 levels. It's a buying opportunity.
And then we have got the Chinese, though, focusing on those buying opportunities in some ways with this story about the IPOs and the number that are going on in Germany as well. They are seizing the opportunity. It's
great, isn't it? A good news story about the markets. Buried on page 16, of course, because you wouldn't ever want a good news story on the front page. And it's in the China Daily, not in the Wall Street Journal or the FT. And yes, Chinese companies are coming to market. There was a time 10 years ago where if you stuck .com on a company name, you could you could float it and make loads. Now, if you put cloud, China, social network, .com, you'll still get away with. But anything with the word China in it, they are doing rather well. But on a serious note, they are producing world-class companies which people want to invest in because there is money to invest, which is looking for risk and looking for return.
And the fact they're getting these IPOs away, again, says that investors do have appetite,
there is capital. Well, if I gave you a choice, do you want to invest in a Chinese IPO or do you want to get 5% per annum from owning Italian debt? It's quite clear what you're going to do. And yet, we panic when nobody wants 5% Italian bonds. Well, of course you don't. Why would you want 5%, and what's the guarantee of that, from the Italian government when you could be getting some returns elsewhere? And that's what quantitative easing was supposed to do. It was supposed to make these other asset classes more attractive. And when it does that, we panic because nobody wants bonds. That was the whole point of it.
And continuing with the optimistic, buoyant mood, Qatar, reasons to be cheerful this morning.
Yes, and for those who don't know much about the Emirate of Qatar, it's actually quite what we in the West would call a progressive country, and quite a role model in this sense, both in terms of it's not just purely oil wealth. It does have strong freedom of speech and strong political ideals which it implements. And yes, indeed, now that you've announced on international news that it is the richest country, there's a whole load of people lining up at global airports looking for a cash bailout for their governments and companies as we speak.
And global airports, because again, looking at chief executive hobbies and executives' hobbies, we find out that flying is one of yours.
Well, yes, of course. A long time since I got the pilot's license. I haven't been up in the air for a while.
Does it give you the edge in business?
Listen, have you seen how volatile the markets are? Do you think I need more excitement? I'd go bungee jumping for stability. I of course, like horse riding in the Himalayas. It feels like one of those marriage ads, you know, that pilot horse riding. And the markets for excitement.
Yeah. Alpesh Patel of Prifinian Partners, thank you, as ever, for going through the papers. And thank you for being with us.
Bye-bye.